Chauvelin felt as if his head would burst. Sneeze after sneeze seemed to nearly choke him. He was blind, deaf, and dumb for the moment, and during that moment, Blakely quietly, without the slightest haste, took up his hat, took some money out of his pocket, which he left on the table, then calmly stalked out of the room.
Oh, that sneaky, elusive Pimpernel.
Chapter 26. The Jew.
Wow! That got awkward so fast. Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation. This is a review show in which I compare movie adaptations to the books they adapted to see if the original plot, themes and tone were carried over. Jumping right into it, The Scarlet Pimpernel was published in 1905 and is the work of novelist, playwright and Baroness Emma Orczy. The good Baroness was born in Hungary in 1865, but her entire family was forced to flee the country when she was just 3 years old after her father's estate was set on fire as part of a peasant's uprising. They travelled around Europe for a while before eventually settling down in England. She published a few books without much positive response before striking gold with The Scarlet Pimpernel, and going on to write an entire series of sequels and spin-offs based around him and this universe. Despite countless adaptations in TV, radio syndications, stage interpretations, and movies as far back as 1917, The Scarlet Pimpernel currently exists in that very low level of notoriety where most people will recognise the name due to second-hand references and parodies in popular media, but have no idea what his actual deal is. But fear not, my most beautiful watchers. The gorgeous Englishman who stands before you is here to synopsisize the crap out of the gorgeous Englishman that's been forgot. The Scarlet Pimpernel is a historical fiction set in the turbulent first years of the French Revolution. Not the one that's from Les Mis. The French actually had a bunch of revolutions. This is the one that's referenced in Hamilton.
Should we honor our treaty, King Louis's head? Do whatever you want, I'm super dead.
In case you weren't aware, this was a rather intense period in the history of the country in which the lower classes finally got sick of centuries of oppression and perpetual inequality from the aristocratic rulers of France and succeeded in overthrowing the monarchy itself in favour of a republic. As is often the case after a bloody and painful war, the newly installed government was a tad fanatical, and the early years of their rule is remembered in particular for the mass executions of the former noble class. A machine highly efficient at chopping off heads all day long was invented specially for it, the dreaded guillotine. The Baroness, drawing from the kind of hero she fantasized about being around to protect her family in her youth, invented Sir Percy Blakely, an English nobleman who regularly traveled to France to rescue as many former aristocrats from death row as possible. He chose for his calling card a picture of a little red flower native to England called the Scarlet Pimpernel, presumably to rub his Englishness in the faces of his French adversaries as he stole their prisoners from right under their noses and smuggled them back to the safety of fair England using a variety of cunning plans, convincing disguises, and 19 like-minded and fiendishly loyal friends who made up the League of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Very, very interestingly, this book is credited with popularizing some of the tropes that would become the bread and butter of American comic book superheroes decades later, and Batman in particular. Yeah, believe it or not, this actually paved the way for this. You see, not only was he an early adopter of having a secret identity, Sir Percy was also the first successful example of the rich idiot with no day job trope, in which an absolute badass assumes the air of a wealthy playboy with no brains or courage between missions to allay suspicions. Yes, well, one simply must keep up with the latest fashion, even if it makes one feel like one's cravat is attempting to leap from his chest, as if it has a pressing engagement elsewhere. Good lord, are those vagabonds still at it? We'll have no sleep tonight at this rate. Right, the Comte de Winter and his children are being transferred out of the Temple prison at 6 o'clock. We have to make sure the guards are distracted so we can... Oh, odds fish, young fair my lad, but you must try this Sauvignon the prince is dishing out this evening. It's positively divine. Baroness Orczy was clearly not particularly interested in historical accuracy down to the detail, as there are multiple glaring inaccuracies in the dates and figures, but I dare say a story about an aristocratic master of disguise was not intended to be used as a textbook. Another important thing to note, while this is a story that undeniably revolves entirely around the Scarlet Pimpernel, he is not the point of view character, and in fact you would probably be surprised just how little he directly appears in the narrative. The POV is split between a few characters, primarily from Sir Percy's French wife Marguerite, who is completely ignorant of his double life for most of the book, and partly from his arch-enemy Citizen Souvain, a French counter-spy obsessed with revealing the identity of the naughty Pimpernel that was making a fool of the glorious new French Republic. I liked this book in general, but I don't think a modern reader would get the same experience as the original 1905 audience, because it relies quite heavily on the big reveal of who the Scarlet Pimpernel is, and as the tropes this book helped invent are so commonplace now, it's kind of impossible not to see it coming a mile off. In addition, this might just be me, but I have to confess, in a post-2020 world, I am less enthused by the idea of a champion of the 1%. To be fair, the Baroness did manage to rouse my sympathies just a little by emphasizing that the Scarlet Pimpernel was prioritizing rescuing families with innocent children who would otherwise have followed their parents to the guillotine. But still. Of the many adaptations involving this character, a TV film released in 1982 was something of a standout in popularity. Headed by British New Wave director Clive Donner, it starred Anthony Andrews, Jane Seymour, and Gandalf the Grey himself, Sir Ian McKellen, who I desperately want to call baby-faced even though he's clearly in his 40s here. The film seems to have been reasonably well received in its time, and it scored itself an Emmy Award for costume design and nominations for Outstanding Drama Special and Art Direction. Just as a film, I think it's deserving of its praise, as the costumes are indeed outstanding, though I was slightly confused as to why Sir Ian has a bronzed avocado around his neck. There's no weak links in the directing or acting departments, though again I was slightly confused after a while because no one attempted any accents, leaving it not immediately apparent who was supposed to be English and who was French. The film declares itself to be an adaptation of two books in the series, the first and the eighth, which is titled El Dorado. This is technically true, but I would say that it draws way more heavily from the former and only borrows the vaguest elements from the latter towards the end. My only serious complaint is, I really started to feel the 2 hours and 15-minute runtime towards the end, which conveniently begs the question, was that the result of them cramming two books into one film or some other reason? Let's talk adaptation. The setting, time period, and well, pretty much all of the general setup of the first novel is recaptured almost exactly in the film. They quickly and effectively establish the blood-soaked horror of Madame Guillotine and the fast whittling down she was doing of the unlucky French aristocratic class before introducing the ray of hope the Scarlet Pimpernel provides her intended victims. The story is reasonably in keeping with the book, up until a point. It's worth noting some of these things were revealed later in the book, usually through a character recounting a story about the Pimpernel. However, non-chronological storytelling is always way harder to get away with in films, so I won't hold this reordering against it. The Crimson Pimpernel personally sneaking into Paris to extract people using a variety of rather horrifying disguises, employing things like the threat of plague to ensure a quick and easy escape through the city gate checkpoints, then returns home to act like a foppish twit for a bit for the sake of any French spies who might be looking for the thorn in their side. To add an extra layer to his facade, he even concocts a humorous, mildly mocking ditty about his own alter ego.
Is he in heaven? Or is he in hell? That damned, elusive Pimpernel.
Meanwhile, his future wife Marguerite is busy accidentally getting a whole family of aristocrats killed. Her brother Armand had gotten a little too friendly with a nobleman's daughter, so he had had the poor lad beaten by thugs. Though she is extremely pissed at this, Marguerite doesn't mean them any serious harm, but she inadvertently lets information get to the wrong people that the aristocrat in question was in secret correspondence with enemies of France, leading, much to her regret and guilt, to the whole family's arrest and execution. Shortly after their meet-cute, courtship and marriage, in which Sir Percy is thoroughly head over heels for her, he learns of her actions in the vaguest, most incriminating sounding way, and they both display a colossal inability to communicate, instead immediately growing apart and letting their marriage turn cold and distant. Due to this distrust, Sir Percy decides he can't let her in on his secret, allowing her to join the rest of Europe in thinking that he's just a rich, useless, empty-headed jackass. Citizen Chauvelin, the Committee of Public Safety
team member tasked with catching the elusive Pimpernel intercepts a letter that unfortunately reveals to him that his target will be at a ball being thrown by the Prince of Wales soon, and, even more unfortunately, finds documents that implicate Armand in treason. The dirty scoundrel uses the latter to blackmail Marguerite into helping him discover which English fop at the ball is Marvel's Scarlet Pimpernel, which she very unhappily does by cunningly intercepting a secret note a League member was trying to destroy. It reveals that the Scarboy himself will be in a certain room at a certain time, forcing her to unwittingly lead Chauvelin to her own husband. Sir Percy departs for another mission in France, and almost as soon as he's out the door, Marguerite figures out that she's been married to the Scarlet O'Hara this whole time and is overcome with fear for him, knowing Chauvelin is onto him. She talks his second-in-command, Sir Andrew Ffoulkes, into escorting her to France to try to help the husband she now has renewed love and respect for, and it's here that the plot starts to mix pretty heavily with El Dorado, so bear with me. Sir Percy's mission is to rescue the Dauphin, the Prince of France himself, who is being held prisoner in harsh conditions since the beheading of his parents. To this end, he recruits Armand into his league to work as a spy for him. He has competition for this goal with another group of troublemakers, headed by Baron de Batz, a surviving aristocrat with secret royalist loyalties, who wishes to rescue the boy himself, though for less noble reasons, as he's in the pay of the Austrian government and wants to claim the reward they offered for the prince. Due to them getting in each other's way and the Baron using Armand's lover as leverage, Sir Percy succeeds in rescuing the prince but is captured by Chauvelin and imprisoned. Fortunately, he planned for this eventuality, and with Armand and Marguerite's help, everyone escapes back to England in his personal ship.
The Daydream's going to be anchored just off the coast underneath the cliffs that should keep her hidden from any passing French patrols. There's a creek about 3 miles to the north that we can take the dinghy up and meet up with. Lord love me, old boy, but that was a spiffing joke. Most droll. I demand that you join me in my estate in June and reduce my other guests to fits of laughter as well. Don't forget to remember me to the Duke of Essex next time you see him. The old boy owes me a game of hazard and I am determined to win the pot this time. Fuck off.
Unsurprisingly, the filmmakers also saw that the book's big twist reveal wasn't something that was going to hold up with a modern audience, so made no attempt to hide the fact that Sir Percy is the Scarlet Pimpernel. This allowed them to actually focus on the stuff he was doing instead of just his wife's perception of it, though I was pleased that they didn't shunt her out of the limelight completely, considering how important she was in the book. There's a few interesting adjustments to Marguerite and her dynamic with her red flower chappie. She was originally an influential socialite amongst the well-off in France. Not high class enough to be in danger of the guillotine, she was still such a respected figure in society, she was often referred to as the smartest woman in Europe. People were confused as hell when she married a twit like Sir Percy and assumed it was for fiscal reasons, but you discover as the book goes on that she actually did it because she got off on how insanely infatuated with her he seemed to be, reasoning she might enjoy having a love slave for a husband, a Scarlet Pimpernel, if you will. Now, I know that sounds bad, but you have to understand how much of the book was about her and Sir Percy's personal arcs, specifically working through their respective vices of pride. As the story goes on, she realizes how much better it is to love someone because you admire and respect them, and for his part, Sir Percy comes to realize that even though he was willing to let the world think that he was an idiot to suit his noble goals, he was still a damn stubborn, prideful fool when it came to his wife, and that pride had clearly almost destroyed their marriage. In the film, Marguerite has gotten a bit of a downgrade in station, working as an actress, which at the time was considered to be a pretty skeevy job. In his courtship of her, Sir Percy often let his mask of foppishness fall, allowing her to fall in love with the real him for much less unhealthy reasons than in the book. He only goes full airhead on her when he thinks that she's a willing informant, which she calls him out for as she knows it's not the real him. Because her relationship with Sir Percy is relatively way more healthy and honest from the start in the film, you don't quite get the same sense of just how thirsty Marguerite gets for the Scarlet Pimpernel as her love and respect for her gormless husband dwindles away. This sidesteps another trope that's fairly common now in the age of Lois Lane ignoring Clark Kent because she just can't stop thinking about how toned and shapely Superman's arse is. The film somewhat crowbars in Well, not quite a love triangle, but something love triangle adjacent. There's a vague reference to Chauvelin and Marguerite having some sort of acquaintance in the past, but now they start the story embroiled in a very one-sided romance. Chauvelin even states that he expects to marry her someday. I mean, bro. Come on, bro. She's clearly not into you. Stop it. He's also way more involved in almost all of her plot beats now, hovering over her constantly and forcing her into the bad decisions that she was quite capable of making all on her own in the book, reducing her responsibility for them and, I think, robbing her of a lot of character depth. Another interesting change applies to the last conversation between Sir Percy and Marguerite before he left for his mission, in which she asks for his help in saving her brother. In the book, she was talking to her husband, having no idea that he was secretly the Scarlet Pimpernel. In the film, she's talking to the Scarlet Pimpernel with no clue as of yet that he is in fact her hubby. It was a rather touching scene in the book where the two finally let their guards down and talked about their failings to the other. It was laden with passion, vulnerability, love, repressed and torture due to misunderstandings. The film's interpretation of this scene lacks that self-reflective element, but to its credit it's still intense for different reasons. You can tell Sir Percy is crazy close to giving in to the temptation to reveal himself to her, and it hits him a lot harder to hear just how innocent his wife is of the things that he had been treating her like crap because of. The ending of the film kind of veers off from both books it was drawing on to include a scene in which Chauvelin orders the captive Pimpernel's execution, and only after everyone has heard the firing squad banging away outside does the Scarlet Trollonel reveal that the men that Chauvelin thought was his squad of lackeys had actually been replaced with League members quite some time ago. Alas, this fell a little flat for me. All of the Pimpernel's plans in the book may have been undeniable hardcore examples of the Batman gambit, intricate schemes that require everything to go exactly as planned without the slightest deviation, but he never did anything completely pointless, and as far as I can see there really was no benefit whatsoever to going along with the charade of being a prisoner from the moment that he and Chauvelin were alone. The film makes a vague attempt to lampshade this as Chauvelin raises these very questions, and while Sir Percy tries to pass it off as him messing with his arch-rival just for funsies, it's pretty glaringly obvious that it was solely for the sake of fooling the movie's audience. Either way, I think we can all agree that it was probably a dick move to let his missus think that he had just died, all for the sake of messing with Magneto's head for a few seconds. They also snuck in a climactic sword fight between the Scarlet Pimp Slap and Chauvelin, apparently not content with the battle of wits that almost every book ended on. I can't personally object to this too much because I've always appreciated things that feed into my sword fetish. Speaking of fetishes, the third or fourth time Sir Percy cut some clothing off Chauvelin, I began to wonder if maybe they should just fuck and get it out of their system.
Take him away and strip him.
The final change I wish to take note of is the addition of a hilarious catchphrase, which I have to confess I wouldn't have thought the Scarlet Pimpernel would benefit from, but honestly, it kind of works.
Sink me, sink me, sink me, Your Highness. Sink me, sink me, sink me, sink me.
Sink me. For once, I actually think most scenes and plot beats from the book are included, even if the exact details of them aren't always exactly the same. The setting is often adjusted, and extra plot points from El Dorado are jammed in, but there's nothing that really stands out in its absence until right at the end. Because the last 20 minutes or so of the film is split between El Dorado plot points and an entirely original climax, there's no representation for the final few chapters of the Scarlet Pimpernel. And I can't say that's entirely a bad thing, because those final chapters are awkward, to say the least. Sorry to keep you hanging, my beautiful watchers. It is finally time to discuss chapter 26, The Jew. Okay, so what happened in the book originally was Chauvelin cornered Sir Percy alone in a French inn after discovering his identity. He was alone, but he had just sent his lieutenant to go and fetch his squad of soldiers so they could apprehend him. Instead of admitting that the jig was obviously up, or attempting violence, the pushing up Pimpernels doubles down on his gormless idiot persona, and this throws Chauvelin off so much he's distracted enough to accept a pinch of snuff from his target, which turns out to have been replaced with pepper. While the French agent is busy sneezing his head head off, Sir Percy calmly leaves the room, supposedly to flee to the rendezvous point where he is to meet Armand and the other men he's in France to rescue. However, and you don't find this out until later, in a sneaky Pimpernel move, he actually only went a little way down the road, put on a disguise, and doubled back. The disguise in question is a filth-covered Jewish man who pretends that he was bribed by the Scarlet Pimpernel to not tell anyone where he was going, but is just so darn greedy, he's willing to take them there in exchange for a bigger bribe, and he spends the rest of the book pretending to be a weaselly, pathetic coward. Thus, by assuming the role of his pursuer's opportunistic guide, he's able to get to the rendezvous point without being tracked and chased down by French horsemen. Then, once they've arrived, he sneaks off to give his friends the heads up on how to escape. Chauvelin, still fooled by the disguise and believing that Sir P had slipped out of his clutches, vents his frustrations by having the Jew beaten to within an inch of his life and left behind bruised and bleeding on the roadside, which, once he has recovered, allows him to make his own escape. I should mention that Marguerite is observing all of this from a distance and makes the decision to sacrifice herself to save her husband, also not seeing through his disguise. It's the decision that completes her arc into being a brave, selfless person, and fortunately she survives the experience. Up until this point, the good Baroness had only been poking fun at the French, and as a hot-blooded Englishman, it's actually mandatory that I approve of some good-natured French-related banter, but the anti-Semitism was rough to get through. There seems to be some attempt to distance the author and the lead from this, as you know, it's the savage Frenchmen who have this burning disgust for the Jewish people, and Sir Percy was simply playing into their prejudices, but, you know, I will be damned if I ever clocked any sort of confirmation in the text that either know that Jewish people aren't actually like this gross stereotype. So, yeah, that was an unfortunate end to what had been an enjoyable book up until that point, and I'm glad the film decided to go in a different direction. Final thoughts. Well, the Scarlet... Sink me, I've run out of puns. Oh well, while the film is a little iffy on the exact details, and there's a clear intention to make the story more cinematic, I'd say the filmmakers were clearly pretty committed to recapturing the original theme of the book. Combining two books does make the plot a little dense and hard to follow in places, and my assessment is it was responsible for the bloated runtime. I think they could have made a much more cohesive movie by just adapting the first book and changing the ending, but it's debatable. All in all, I would recommend this film to a fan of the book with trepidations, or just anyone who was ever curious about what an English version of Zorro would look like. Just maybe split it into multiple viewings. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. If you enjoyed this episode of Lost in Adaptation, be sure to throw your boy all those good YouTube algorithm-pleasing things. Likes, comments, and shares on social media are especially appealing to it, I hear. If you find yourself craving more than YouTube can give you, there's some exclusive content on my Patreon page, including a Lost in Adaptation about Howl's Moving Castle and a podcast I just started about my process for making these videos. Besides that, all I ask is that you take good care of yourselves out there during these troubled times, and I hope that I will see you next time.
They seek him here, they seek him there, those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven, or is he in hell? That damned, elusive Pimpernel. Some people say pimpin' ain't easy, but pimpanelling, jolly good time. Now dig this rhyme.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Hote, Satel Spurtloff, and Kat Harker. Shout out to Ilnej for performing this awesome tune, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's co-producer, Kate Robinson. She does some really amazing work on her channel that I think you would really enjoy, so be sure to check that out too.
Yes, old fish kitty. Should be working. The early years of their rule is remembered. The early years of their rule are remembered. It is. I think it's gotta be is. Right? Is it is? I don't know. You can... I'm sure you're yelling at the screen right now, Kate, just saying, it's this one, Dom, you fucking idiot.